It is September of 1938. The summer is over. Matthew has his mobilization papers, and somewhere in Munich, four men are sitting around a table deciding the fate of a country whose representatives were not invited to the meeting. The four men were Chamberlain, Deladier, Mussolini, and Hitler. The country being decided about was Czechoslovakia. The Czechs are waiting in an anteroom. Think about that for a moment. Your country's existence, its borders, its people, its future is being negotiated in a room you are not allowed to enter. This is what Sartre means when he says freedom is always situated. You are free, but you are free inside a world that was built before you arrived and will continue after you leave. And sometimes the world will make decisions about you without asking. The reprieve takes place across 8 days during which Europe held its breath and then exhaled too soon. Chamberlain comes home from Munich, waving a piece of paper. Peace in our time, he says. The crowds cheer, people weep with relief. Mothers who had been quietly measuring their sons against the height of a soldier stops measuring. For 1 week, maybe two, the world believes it. Sartre is writing this novel in 1944. He knows what the relief brought. He knows what peace in our time costs. He knows the names of the camps, and so the reprieve is written with a particular devastating kind of dramatic irony. The irony of watching people celebrate a stay of execution as if it were a pardon. But here's what makes this novel extraordinary. Sartre is not writing a history book. He's not writing about politicians. He's writing about what it feels like to be an ordinary human being living inside a moment of collective delusion. What it feels like to know, somewhere beneath the relief, beneath the celebration, beneath the desperate need to believe, that this is not over. You know that feeling, not from 1938, from your own life, the relationship you stayed in, because the alternative was too frightening to face. The conversations you kept postponing, because as long as you didn't have it, the problem wasn't quite real yet. That is reprieve, the gap between knowing and admitting that you know. Before we enter the characters, we need to talk about the book's form, because the reprieve does something that no novel in the trilogy does. It breaks itself. Sartre cuts between dozens of characters across all of Europe, mid-sentence, sometimes mid-thought. You are with Matthew in Paris, and then suddenly, without warning, you are with Czech soldier on the hillside, and then a woman in French village, and then a couple in a hotel room, and then back to Paris, and the sentence hasn't ended yet. And that exactly is the point, because consciousness itself is disorienting. When history is moving faster than individual can process, you cannot think in complete sentences when the world might end next week. You cannot finish a thought when a radio broadcast might interrupt it. You cannot be entirely present in your own personal drama, a lover's quarrel, a shared meal, a moment of joy, when the background radiating a catastrophe is always there. In 2026, you know this feeling intimately. You are trying to have a conversation with someone you love, and part of your brain is on the news feed. You're trying to enjoy a meal, and somewhere underneath the enjoyment is a low frequency of anxiety that you cannot quite name and cannot quite silence. You are, as Sartre's characters are, simultaneously present and absent, here and also somewhere else entirely. Sartre's formal experiment in the reprieve is not a literary trick. It is a precise diagnosis of what it means to be a conscious human being inside a moment of collective crisis. Let's now return to Matthew. I hope you remember him. That philosopher teacher, that man who built his entire identity around the refusal to commit to anything. He has his papers now. The French army does not care about his philosophy. It does not care that he has spent 7 years carefully preserving his freedom from obligation. It does not care that he has a theory, a sophisticated, well articulated, intellectually respectable theory about why commitment is the enemy of authentic selfhood. The paper says, report for duty, and here, in this moment, something genuinely interesting happens to Matthew. He doesn't resist, he doesn't philosophize his way around it, he doesn't construct an argument for why his particular freedom should be exempt from history's demands. He just goes, and Sartre presents this not as defeat, but as the beginning of something, because for the first time, Matthew is not choosing in the abstract. He is not philosophizing about what he might do in some hypothetical future circumstance. History has handed him a concrete situation, a real one, with a date on it, and a place, and consequences. And the question that book once circled endlessly without even quite landing on it, is no longer theoretical. Who are you when the situation is real? Think about the difference between the person you are in your head, the brave one, the principled one, the one who knows exactly what they would do in the hard situation, and the person you actually are when the hard situation arrives. Not the imagined crisis, the actual one. The phone call, the conversation, and the moment of confrontation you have been rehearsing for years, and now it's here, and it's nothing like the rehearsal. Most of us live almost entirely in rehearsal. The reprieve is the moment, the rehearsal ends. Of all the characters in the trilogy, Daniel is the one Sartre understood most personally, and the one he found most philosophically terrifying. Daniel is gay in 1938 France, in a world that would define him, fix him, make him an object of shame before he could define himself. He has spent his entire life in a war with his own consciousness. He cannot tolerate himself, but he also cannot tolerate the idea that he has chosen to be this way. Because if he chose it, he is responsible for it. And if he is responsible for it, he has no one to blame but himself. So Daniel performs a philosophical act that Sartre considers the most seductive and the most catastrophic: escape from freedom available to human beings. He decides that God exists not because he has found faith, but because he has had a revelation, not because the evidence has convinced him, but because if God exists, then Daniel is seen, permanently, completely, without possibility of escape. God's gaze would fix his identity the way no human gaze can. God would make Daniel a thing, a defined and categorizable thing, rather than this being terrifying, undecided, free consciousness that he cannot bear to inhabit. Let me say that again, because it is one of the most disturbing ideas in the novel. Daniel invents God, or convinces himself of God, because he wants to be watched. Because being watched means being fixed. Being fixed means having an identity. Having an identity means never having to choose one. Sartre is not mocking religious faith here. He is doing something more precise. He's showing us the psychology behind one very specific kind of faith. The faith that is adopted not out of love, not out of genuine spiritual encounter, but out of desperate need to outsource the unbearable work of self-creation. In 2026, Daniel's move is everywhere, not just in religion. It's in the person whose entire identity is their political ideology, who thinks whatever their side thinks, feels whatever their side feels, so they never have to sit alone with the terrifying question of what they actually believe. It's in the person who defines themselves entirely through their relationships, who uses their partner's need for them as a mirror that tells them who they are, so they never have to decide for themselves. It's in anyone, and this is all of us at times, who has ever chosen a structure, an institution, an ideology, a relationship, a religion, not because they genuinely believe in it, but because believing in it means they don't have to believe in themselves. Daniel's tragedy is not that he's a gay. His tragedy is that he has found the most elaborate, most metaphysically total possible way to avoid being free. And it still doesn't work because you cannot unbecome free. Not even God can do that for you. Now, let me introduce to you another character in The Reprieve who is not surprised by Munich. His name is Gomez. He is a Spanish painter. He went to Spain to fight against Franco. He fought, he lost, and now he is in France, watching the French celebrate the same thing the Spanish celebrated. A temporary agreement, a piece of paper, a promise from a man who does not keep promises, and he knows, with a particular knowledge of someone who has already lived through the next chapter, exactly what this celebration means. Gomez is Sartre's way of saying something that the novel doesn't state directly, which is the information is available. The truth about what appeasement produces was not hidden in 1938. Spain has already happened. The pattern was already visible. The people celebrating in the streets of Paris, they were not uninformed. They were choosing not to know. And that choice, the choice not to know what you could know, to not see what is visible, to not draw the conclusion, and the evidence is drawing for you, is bad faith. Collective, historical, civilizational bad faith. I want you to sit with Gomez for a moment, because Gomez is a person in every era who can see what's coming, not because they are smarter than everyone else, but because they have been paying attention. They have read the previous chapters. They have not looked away, and they watch the people around them celebrating a reprieve as if it were a resolution, and they feel something that is half grief, half fury, because they know that the celebration itself is a part of what makes the catastrophe inevitable. When you look away from a problem, you're not just failing to solve it, you're actively choosing every day to allow it to grow. That choice has consequences, and the consequences do not care that you are afraid. They do not care that the truth was uncomfortable. They arrive anyway. The Reprieve is the most philosophically complex of the three books, not because it is the most difficult, but because it's working on most levels simultaneously. Let me break it down. First, Sartre argues that freedom is always situated. You're free, but you're free as a specific person, in a specific body, in a specific historical moment, in a specific country, in a specific class. You did not choose your situation, but your responses to your situation. That is always yours. A French soldier in 1938 did not choose to be born French. He did not choose this war. He did not choose the political failures that produced this moment. But he chooses every day what kind of soldier he will be, what kind of man he will be, whether he will be a person who collaborated or resisted, who maintained dignity or surrendered it, who acted from genuine choice or hid behind the excuse of orders. Second, Sartre argues that bad faith can be collective. We usually think of self-deception as a private act. I am lying to myself. But the Reprieve shows us something darker, an entire civilization lying to itself, together, simultaneously, with social reinforcement. Because if everyone around you is choosing to believe the comfortable thing, then believing the uncomfortable truth requires a kind of courage that most people cannot sustain alone. It is much easier to be truthful in private than to be truthful against the current or collective self-deception. Ask anyone who saw a financial crisis coming and was told they were being hysterical. Ask anyone who raised concerns inside an institution that had decided not to hear them. Ask anyone who said quietly in a room full of celebration, I don't think this is over. Third, and this is the most radical argument of the novel, Sartre says that the opposite of bad faith is not certainty. Because certainty is not available, not in 1938, not in your life, and not ever. You never know for certain that the relationship is right, that the career is right, that the cause is worth fighting for, that history will vindicate you. The opposite of bad faith, the thing Sartre is building toward across all three books, is the willingness to act without certainty, to commit fully, irreversibly, knowing you might be wrong, knowing the information is incomplete, knowing the outcome is not guaranteed, choosing anyway, because not choosing is also a choice, and a worse one. This brings me to yet another question. What is the thing you've reached a temporary peace with? Told yourself it's fine, it's handled, we got through it, when some part of you knows it's not handled. All the issues of your life that you have been postponing since you were 22. Okay, I think I need water. Sartre is not asking you to catastrophize. He's not asking you to live in anxiety. He is asking you to do something much more difficult than worrying. He's asking you to look what's actually there, to resist the enormous social and psychological pressure, to celebrate a reprieve as if it were a resolution. Because the reprieve is real, the breathing room is real. But what you do with the breathing room, that is the only question that matters. The 8 days end, Chamberlain waves his paper, and the crowds cheer, and Sartre's characters, scattered across France and Europe, each having passed through their own private versions of collective crisis, return to their lives. But they are not the same lives. Something has happened to them in the space of 8 days. History has visited. It did not stay, it did not announce what it would require of them. It simply appeared, reminded them of its existence, and withdrew. Matthew is going to be a soldier, he knows it now. In a way, he didn't know it at the beginning of these 8 days. Not just legally, not just on paper, but existentially. He's the kind of person to whom this is going to happen. And the question that has stalked him through 2 novels now, the question of who he is, what he stands for, and what he would die for, is no longer academic. It has a deadline. There is a word in French, sources. Again, please don't mind my pronunciation. It means reprieve. It also means suspended sentence, a sentence that has been handed down but not yet carried out. The crime has been committed. The verdict has been reached. You are simply waiting. Europe is on the suspended sentence, and somewhere in the background, the clock is running. In part 3, the suspended sentence is carried out. France falls, the German army enters Paris. French soldiers, including Matthew, are captured, defeated, and humiliated. Everything that bad faith built, the comfortable agreements, the celebrated reprieves, the careful avoidance of uncomfortable truths, collapses in a matter of weeks. And in the ruins of everything, in a church tower with German tanks in the valley below, and no possibility of survival, Matthew will finally make a choice. Not the choice of a man trying to preserve his freedom, the choice of a man who has nothing left to preserve. And in that choice, in that 15-minute stand against an enemy he cannot defeat, he will feel for the first time what freedom actually is. Imagine it took a war, it took the end of everything, it took having nothing left to lose. But he eventually got there.